Okay, so we are starting Pesach stuff. Okay, and
we're sure like the stuff in this pack is this all assumed sources I don't have to write down.
Yeah, I think that's a good rule for now. Yeah.
Okay.
So what we're gonna try to focus on, at least the plan, is to do Hilchos Korban Pesach. But there's so much stuff that we're not gonna be able to do all of it. So what I figured we should do is whenever we start a new mitzvah in the Rambam, okay. Whenever we do a new mitzvah in the Rambam, then we always do 4 sources, right? We do the Sefer mitzvos for that mitzvah, then the minyan mitzvos, then the koseres, and then the first halacha of that mitzvah in actual Mishneh Torah. So what I think we should start doing is go through all the mitzvos in 3 out of the 4 sources, meaning Sefer mitzvos, minyan mitzvos, and koseres. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then decide which of those we want to actually focus on, and then focus on those. Okay. And in fact, if you look at the packet, look at the page before that. So they have they do this for every section in the Rambam. They have a table of contents. Okay. And this is actually, I want to read through this first, even though it's not written by the Rambam. I don't even want to read through the whole thing, just to show you where it is. So this is in Hilchos Korban Pesach, which is in Sefer Avoda. Quick review. What's the difference between Sefer Avoda and Sefer Korbanos? Remember? What's the difference between Sefer Avoda and Sefer Korbanos?
You have the entire the Mishkan, the whole service. Korbanos would be just Asham or Shlamim.
Good guess. Not exactly. So the Rambam has it when he's defining the books. He defines it as
Where?
This is in the Hakdamah. Okay. He defines the books, and he says that Sefer. Yeah.
Do we use the Hakdamah most days?
Do we use the Hakdamah what?
Most days.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why he wrote it. Yeah.
No, I just is it just an assumed source?
Oh, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So he says, so Sefer Shmini, he says, Echel bo mitzvos shein bebinyan mikdash v'korbanos tzibur hatamidin. So v'krasi shem Sefer is Sefer Avoda. So I'm going to call this book. I'm going to include in this book the mitzvos that are about the building of the base of mikdash and the communal continual korbanos. And that's called Sefer Avoda. And then Sefer Tshi, Echel bo mitzvos shein v'korbanos hayachid. Okay, korban, and that v'krasi shem Sefer is Sefer Korbanos. That is the korbana of a yachid. Mm-hmm. So where's Hilchos Korban Pesach going to be? It's a korban hayachid, even though all of Klal Yisrael brings it. Mm-hmm. That's the weird thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Because because there's a lot of stuff that we'll see from the Pesukim that emphasize like the entire Edah, but it is brought on behalf of individuals. Yeah, not like a Tamid, which is only one for the nation. Okay, so let's look at this. Just the again, we're not going to read all of it, but just to get a layout. So you see at the top under Mivneh HaHalachos. So the editor says there are basically 3 sections in Hilchos Korban Pesach. There's Shchitas Pesach L'Bnei Chavurah, right? So the shechting of the Pesach and the people in the group. 2 is Hadzachiel of Pesach Sheni, pushing off Pesach till Pesach Sheni. And then the third one is Achilas Pesach. And then if you look at the on the right column under the individual prakim, here are the 10 chapters. Okay, chapter 1, Shchitas Pesach. Chapter 2, Himanos B'nei Chabura, counting the people of the Chabura. Chapter 3, Bios B'Himanus, problems in accounting or assigning. 4, Psulei HaPesach. Okay, then we get into section 2, which is 5, Hanidchim LePesach Sheni Upturav, those who are pushed off to Pesach Sheni and exemptions. 6, Hatame HaNidche, the person who's Tame and gets pushed off. 7, Tuma Hatachuya B'Tzibor, Tuma that is pushed aside in Tzibor. Then we get to the third section, which is Achilas HaPesach. Achilas Basar Pesach, eating the meat of the Pesach. 9, Hachabura v'Ochlei Pesach, the group and the eating of the Pesach. And then 10, Ha'atzmos v'Hanosar, the bones and then the leftovers. And then the Chagivas Arba Asar. Now, just based on that, do you have any topics that we just read that you are more interested in than others?
Mm-hmm. No. Why are we just thinking more about Pesach Sheni?
Oh, really? I was going to say that's the least interesting thing to me. And the only reason I'm saying it's the least interesting one is in my mind, theoretically you could do the sugi of Pesach Sheni without Pesach Rishon because it's all a question of who gets pushed off. But in my mind, Pesach Sheni kind of presupposes you're familiar with the halachos of Pesach Rishon.
Okay.
I know we're still going to do an overview, but I was just curious. Yeah. Because for me, I think most interested in the Pesach stuff that has to do with the shchita and then the achila and then the Pesach Sheni. Those are that's my preference, but we'll see what other people want to do also.
Okay. Wait, sorry.
Yeah.
So today we're just doing
Today we're still doing the overview, probably today and tomorrow. Okay, but you know what else we're going to do? Okay, and this is something that we have not gotten the opportunity to do. So if you look at the next page, what is the next page in the packet? Is the Torah Shebechsav, right? Hey, let's go. Okay, so the what do you call it? The editors include the Torah Shebechsav here, and we haven't really done this because we haven't done mitzvos that have a lot of Torah Shebechsav in them. Right, like most of the mitzvos we've done in Rambam Bekius are individual Pesukim, but not where like the main halachos are fleshed out in Torah Pesach. So we should actually read through the Torah Pesach first. Okay, and why, if you ask the Rambam, why would the Rambam say you have to read through the Torah Pesach before you do the Mishneh Torah? It's not a trick question. Yeah,
I know. It's like now it's like all you need is the Mishneh Torah and it's nachla, and it's like I'm just thinking mistama.
Oh, okay.
I was like just mistama. I think better in the. I guess me who are trying to just Darsh and everything. Okay,
so you got one out of the two sources that I was thinking of. If you want to look at it, it's in the Mishneh Torah in the Hakdamah. So I'm going to show you the first source first. Look at, it should be the very beginning of the Rambam's Hakdamah, which is going to be on number pages, page 3. First halacha. Okay, so and maybe this is what you meant by mistama. Okay, but yeah.
No, that was not what I meant by mistama. I meant by mistama I meant not even caring about the Rambam.
Okay, fine. Well, all right, fine. So the Rambam's definition of Torah Sheba'al Peh is as follows. Okay, first halacha: Kol ha-mitzvos shenitnu lo Moshe b'Sinai b'Ferusha nitnu. All the mitzvos that were given to Moshe at Sinai were given with their explanation. Shenemar, as it says, v'etzna lecha es luchos ha'evan v'hatorah v'mitzvah. I will give you the stone tablets and the Torah and the mitzvah. The Torah is teaching, mitzvah is commandment. And he says Torah zo Torah shebechsav. Okay, Torah there refers to the written Torah. Mitzvah zo pirusha. And mitzvah is its explanation. V'tzivanu lasos haTorah al pi ha-mitzvah, and we are obligated to do the Torah according to the mitzvah. Mitzvah zo hi hanikras Torah Sheba'al Peh, and this mitzvah is called Torah Sheba'al Peh. So, in other words, what God taught us was the written Torah, and then the explanation of how to do it is called Torah Sheba'al Peh. So you can't really do Torah Sheba'al Peh without the Torah Shebechsav, because that would be like giving practical instructions before you knew what it is that you're actually doing.
So Chumash is Shebechsav.
Yeah.
And then is it Gemara, Mishnah and Gemara that are?
So that's a good question. So it is in Rambam lingo, it is Mishnah, not Gemara, or more properly, skip to the very, very end, because Mishnah was really the first thing, but let's skip to the page.
Because we use this, and I still sometimes don't know what we're talking
So
about.
truthfully, most people who are in yeshivas don't know what they're talking about, because I think most people lump everything under Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Right, and when I say that, I didn't think that was right, but it was starting to make me think like that.
Yeah, no, so people speak too loosely about it, and the Rambam has a very technical definition, which we just read. But look at page 5, halacha lamed ches. In yours, it's lamed ches. In mine, it's So this is where he says the mission statement of the Mishneh Torah.
I was really wondering this today.
Okay, good. So this will make it clear here. So he says, because of this, I girded my loins. Ani Moshe B'Rabi Maimon HaSfardi. I Moshe B'Rabi Maimon HaSfardi. V'nish anti al tzur baruch hu. Oh, so this is he just. Sorry, let me back up one paragraph. All right, we're going to context this. This is where he states the reason for writing the Mishneh Torah. And I know we read this earlier, but it's good to read every week. Okay. Uzman hazeh, nowadays, okay, meaning in the time after the Gaonim, tachu tsaros yiseros, we've been seized by repeated tragedies or distresses. V'dach kasha hakol, and the paragraph above where I told you to read. I don't know the number.
Oh, now we're at Lamed Zayin.
Uzman hazeh, v'dach kasha hakol, and basically things have become very pressured. And the wisdom of our wise men has become lost, and the understanding of our understanding men has become concealed. Therefore, osan haperushim v'hahalachos v'teshuvos. Therefore, those explanations and the halachos and the teshuvos shechibru hagaonim that the gaonim wrote on the Talmud, which was on the Mishnah, and they saw them as clear statements. They are difficult in our days. Only a few people understand them properly. And certainly the Talmud itself, and all the other works, right? The Bavli, the Yishami, and then these Tanaitic works. They require an abstract mind and a wise soul and a lot of time. And only afterwards can you know the verifiable path in matters of asur and mutter, ushar dinei Torah he'achu, and how to keep the laws of Torah. So he's describing this problem basically is that, the Mishnah was written because Torah Sheba'al Peh was in danger of being lost. So the Mishnah was written to preserve Torah Sheba'al Peh for teachers, so the teachers could reconstruct it. Then so that was around 200 CE. Then between the Mishnah and the Gemara, people couldn't understand the Mishnah, and the Jews kept on getting spread out even more. So then the Ravina and Rav Ashi compiled the Talmud Bavli to explain the Mishnah, and a bunch of other Mishnah works like the Tosefta and the Braisos and stuff. And then that started becoming not able to be understood. So the Gaonim wrote all these commentaries on Psach Halacha, and then by the time the Rambam's time got around, people couldn't even understand the Gaonim. And Kosh came the Talmud itself. And when he says understand it, he means to understand what to do from all of those works. Right. So that was the difficulty that was confronting the Rambam at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, so just simple definition.
So Torah Shebiksav is plain pshat. Torah Shebiksav is the Chumash. Okay. In other contexts, Torah Shebiksav refers to all 24 books. Okay, but in halachic context, it refers to the Chumash. Torah Sheba'al Peh is the halachic explanation of the mitzvos in Chumash.
So like some Mishnah.
So the halachic explanation of the mitzvos in Chumash that were given to Moshe at Sinai, Mishnah is the first written version of that, plus the additional derabbanans that were instituted between Moshe's time and the Mishnah.
And where are those?
Those are also in the Mishnah.
Okay,
not all of them, but many of them, and then. And then
not all in the Mishnah. Some of them are.
Yeah, there's, for example, there's nothing about Ner Chanukah in the Mishnah. Right, it wasn't the only thing that was written in the Mishnah.
Oh, Megillah
is written. There's a Masechta of Megillah, but not for Ner Chanukah. Yeah, and the Rambam explains why. In fact, I'm going to read this now because I don't think we've read this here.
Wait, so what Masechta is in Ner Chanukah?
Ner Chanukah is in Shabbos.
Oh,
yeah.
So they added it. So they added it to Shabbos, even though there's a Mishnah for Shabbos, but there isn't that section of it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I think there's only one Mishnah that mentions Hanukkah, but it's not about Hanukkah candles. Right. Look at in the thing I just gave you, which is the Rambam's Perush Mishnayos, which I'm not going to look at on the computer. Look at page in the first part of the book. Look at. Let's see here. Just have to find it. I think it's going to be on page Pei Aleph, right after the ginormous picture of the menorah. But let me just. I might be wrong, but it's going to be around there. Where? Oh, yeah, here we go. Yeah, it's actually on. Yeah, at the left column. So he right in the text. There's a footnote 5, and the word after that, vidah. Last one line is vidah. See right here. Yeah, right over here.
Oh, it's up here.
Vidah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Okay. So he's answering a question here, which is why is it that there's only one Mishnah about tzitzis and tefillin in the entire Shas? Okay. Because those are pretty big mitzvos, right? So he says vidah shatchelos va'lavan, so that you should know that tchelos and lavan afal pi she'in ma'achmin zeh or this or hariyahim yachad mitzvah achas lo shtei mitzvos. That's not what I wanted. Keep going. Of all tefillah shel yad v'shel rosh heim shtei mitzvos k'mo shegarner. Right. Actually, this is what I want. Lefikach maybe this is not what I wanted. Okay, wait, this is it. But the laws of tzitzis and tefillin, and the mezuzah, the seder asiyasan, and how to make them, brachos haruyos lahen, and all the brachos that are appropriate to them, kol hadinim hashayachim lakach, and all the laws related to this, v'hashe'elos shenis oru behen, and the questions that were raised about them. It is not in line with the goal of our compilation to speak about them. In other words, this is the Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah. And he's saying we're not going to talk about all those halachos because the goal of our commentary on the Mishnah is not to talk about all these questions. Okay, why? Because we are commentators. And the Mishnah did not establish for these mitzvos any unique statements that encompass all of their laws such that we should explain them. Okay, in other words, let's say, for example, certain mishnayos are comprehensive, that they included like references to like all the laws. But with tzitzis and tefillin, you just get like this one Mishnah here. You know, you barely get anything. In Hanukkah, you don't get any Mishnah that's about the laws of Hanukkah. So the Rambam, who's explaining the Mishnah, is saying, look, we're not going to explain all the laws because the Mishnah doesn't explain all the laws. We're just explaining the Mishnah. Now the question is, well, why didn't the Mishnah explain all the laws?
Right. If we're not going to do it, fine.
Right.
Like, where is it then?
Exactly. So now he says like this, V'tama davar l'da'ati, and the reason for the matter, in my opinion, Pirsuman bisman chibur ha-Mishnah, is because of how widely known they were at the time of the Mishnah. Okay. V'shehim hayu devarim mefursamim regilim, they were well-known familiar things, etel hahamonim b'hayechidim, by the masses and the distinguished people. Lo ne'alam inyanim me'af echad, and they weren't concealed from even one of them. Ulfikach, therefore, lo haya makom ladato ladaber him. That's why Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, when he compiled the Mishnah, didn't leave any place to talk about them. Kashim shlo kava seder hatfila, just like he didn't write down the seder of tefillah. He didn't write down like the seder. Klomar nuscha, meaning its formulation, the seder minui shliach tzibor, or how to appoint a shliach tzibor, machmas pirsuma shel davar, because of how well known the things were. Lefi shelo chiber sidur ela achar el chiber sefer dinim. He wasn't making a siddur, but rather a book of laws. So hold on, let me summarize and then I'll take a question. So in other words, he's saying that since the purpose of the Mishnah was not to make a book of laws, it was to preserve things from being forgotten. And since everyone knows how to make tzitzis, because you have to make tzitzis for your garments, presumably, tefillin is a much harder thing to make. People to make those, people had to know how to say the brachos. People davened every day. So the stuff that was well known, they didn't have to write down. So that's why that's why I was reluctant to say that the Mishnah is synonymous with Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Sheba'al Peh was really how to keep all the mitzvos of Torah Sheba'al. And then the Mishnah was only a written down version for teachers about what was needed to prevent things from being forgotten, but it's not everything.
So Torah Sheba'al Peh was the more comprehensive thing.
Yeah, Torah Sheba'al Peh was the more comprehensive thing.
Where did that get recorded, or did it not?
So it got recorded in part with the Mishnah. More of it was recorded with the Gemara. More of it was recorded with the Gaonim. And then the Rambam is about to say that he recorded all of it. Yeah, what are you going to say? He, in a matter of speaking, he'll finish it saying, yeah, you had a question? We'll see what you're saying in a second.
Yeah. There's also stuff like, if you're just talking about things 5 feet, you would never waste your time explaining what a foot is.
Exactly. That's a great analogy.
And even better because we're a bunch of idiots who forgot how long a foot is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really good analogy. In fact, I think I want to use that analogy from now on. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything that didn't? I guess there is, right? There's things that didn't ever managed to get recorded, and we just don't know anymore.
Yeah. So let's we're caught up to where the Rambam is going to say what he's going to do, and then we'll talk about what happened after that.
Okay.
Really quickly. This is a good review. So now we're back in the Mishneh Torah. The first book that we read. And we are now on Lamed Ches. Oh, no, you don't need that anymore. Yeah, now we're on Lamed Ches. So because of this state of like everyone not knowing how to learn stuff, Na'arti Chasni, I guarded my loins, Ani Moshe Berbi Maimon Sfardi, Vinishanti al Tzur Baruch, when I relied on the rock, blessed is he, Ubinosi B'chol Elo Sfarim, and I understood, analyzed all of these books, meaning the books that the Gaonim wrote to explain the Gemara, to explain the Mishnah. Okay, to prevent Torah Sheba'al Peh from being forgotten. V'ra'isi l'chaber devarim hamisbarim mikol elu hachiburim be'inyan ha'asar v'amoter v'atamim v'atar im shar dinei Torah kulam. And I saw fit to compile in clarified statements from all of these compilations, everything in regards to the prohibited and the permitted, the impure and the pure, with the other laws of the Torah, all of them, b'lashon brura v'derech katzara, all of them in a clear language and a concise manner. So that Torah Shabbat Peh would be arranged in the mouth of everybody without any difficulty with questions and answers. Lo ze omer b'ko, ze omer b'ko. Not this guy says this and this guy says that. Ella devarim brurim krovim nechonim al pi hamishpat asher yisparim mikol elu hachiburim hapirushim hanimtzaim mimos rabbeinu hakadosh v'ad achshav. Rather, clear matters that are accessible and proper based on the law, which is clarified from all of these compilations and explanations that are found from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until now. And one more paragraph, and then we'll summarize, and then I'll explain why Yosef is laughing and why I'm going to respond to it. Okay. Until all of the laws are revealed to the small and the great, meaning not in age, but like in Chachma, bedin kol mitzvah, in the laws of every mitzvah, ubedin kol hadvarim shetiknu chachamim unvim, and in the laws of everything that was established by the chachamim and the neviim. Klal shal davar, the sum of the matter, and this is what Yosef was referencing in the beginning of today. Kedei shelo yehi adam tzarich lechibur acher ba'olam bedin midinei Yisrael, so that no person will need any other compilation in regards to any law out of the laws of Israel. But this compilation will be mikabet, a collection, l'Torah Shabbat Peh kula, for all of Torah Shabbat Peh, im hatakanos v'haminhagos v'hagazeros, along with the rabbinic laws, the enactments, the customs, and the decrees, shenasu mimos Moshe Rabbeinu v'ad chibur haTalmud, that had been enacted from the time of Moshe until the compilation of the Talmud. And as the Gaonim explained in all of their compilations, shechibru achar Talmud, that they compiled after the Talmud. Ufikach, therefore, karasi shem chibur zeh Mishneh Torah. That's why I've named this compilation the Mishneh Torah. Lefish adam korah Torah shebechsav tchila, because a person will read the written Torah first, and then afterwards we'll read this book, and he'll know all of Torah Shabbat Peh. He will not need to read any other book in between. Now, what he means when he says you'll know all of Torah Shabbat Peh, he doesn't mean that this is going to record all of the data in the Mishnah, because, for example, Mishnah, you have a lot of machlokas, and he's only recording the sides that we hold by. But what he means is he's going back on that the initial definition of Torah Shabbat Peh, which is the way to implement the Torah shebechsav. You will have what we call halacha l'ma'aseh, a practical halacha for all the mitzvos in Taryag. And again, to this day, the Rambam remains the only one ever in all of Klal Yisrael who ever attempted to do this. No one even attempted to do this before or after the Rambam.
That's a good question on that.
Yeah. And then I'll explain why Yosef is laughing.
So I'll go from order of most recent thing he said.
Yeah.
First, so what is the Shulchan Aruch then? Like, I thought that.
So Shulchan Aruch is similar to what the Rambam is doing, but the Shulchan Aruch was only on the mitzvos that are practiced nowadays, not on all the mitzvos. Okay. And the Shulchan Aruch also was not attempting to make it without machlokas. So the Shulchan Aruch will bring down, his general rule is that there were three pillars. There was the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rush. And the Shulchan Aruch went with 2 out of 3, unless there was a majority against them, in which case he turned to a couple other authorities. And then the Ramah included what Ashkenazim had. So it's similar to the Mishneh Torah in that it's directed towards practicality, but it doesn't extend to everything. And it's also not without machlokas. And the other thing also is it's not arranged by topic. It's arranged, that's not mine, right? Okay. Yes, it's not arranged by topic. It has no real conceptual order.
Okay.
Yeah. And
then the other thing, so you said what he did is to only give us what everybody holds by, or what we hold by now.
Yeah.
There was ever such a thing that everybody held by?
No. So that's the thing that relates. So first of all, I mean, the reason why I think you're laughing is because the Rambam did not succeed, right? That you can't, I mean, just given the sheer amount of people who argue around the Rambam and all the commentaries on the Rambam and what does the Rambam mean here and here, it's like he in that sense, he didn't succeed in like, you could just read it without a problem, right? But what the Rambam is doing is he's writing his understanding of Torah Shabbat Peh. So these are the conclusions that he came up with, okay? But the way to think of it is Rashi, in his mind, Rashi could have written a Mishneh Torah, and it would have different psak because Rashi holds differently than the Rambam. And the Yotam could have written a Mishneh Torah. The only one who actually did it was the Rambam. And the Gaonim, like each of the Gaonim, had, especially the ones who were leaders of the entire Jewry, where they actually had to be the ones who answer all these questions. in their minds, they had their own Mishneh Torah in their minds with different conclusions, but the Rambam wrote down like his one. So the only time in history we had an actual unanimous agreement,
Right.
and it was when we had a Sanhedrin, and there it wasn't even an agreement. It was just one halacha for everybody. Like the Sanhedrin would paskin, and they wouldn't have different machlokes.
Decide on which one to go with.
Exactly,
they
right.
probably have a machlokes amongst themselves.
Yeah, and intellectually, there's always going to be machlokes.
Yeah.
But the Rambam, the Rambam was basically trying to come up with a substitute Sanhedrin Haggadol that would function that way, so that Klal Yisrael would have one book that they could all rely on. It's just it didn't get widely accepted. Yeah.
Okay.
And ironically, the Shulchan Aruch did, and the reason why it's ironic is because the Shulchan Aruch did not intend for his book to be a book of Pesach.
Right.
He intended the Beis Yosef to be, which is a commentary on the Torah, to be the primary book that people look through in order to figure out what to do. And the Shulchan Aruch was just like spark notes on it. But then the Shulchan Aruch became the book of Pesach for people. Yeah,
it would be correct to say Shulchan Aruch was even accepted. And allow me to explain. If you accept the Shulchan Aruch with Ramah, I don't see how you can call it accepting Shulchan Aruch. It's just not accepting the Shulchan Aruch.
You mean because of the Ramah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's accepted in the sense that it seems like everything after the Shulchan Aruch, in terms of people following, like in terms of halacha l'maaseh, was written with reference to the Shulchan Aruch. Okay. That became like the hub, that everyone was going around. In the same sense, in that sense, it is like in the Mishnah was the hub that everything was around, and then the Talmud Bavli, so it seems like with the Gaonim, there was no single work that was a hub, but then the Shulchan Aruch took that mantle, whereas the Rambam wanted his book to take that mantle, but it didn't. Yeah.
And the Gaonim would need to know this Mishneh Torah of their own. Would they also need to know what the other ones would hold? Like, would Rambam be aware what the Mishneh Torah version would look like for Rashi?
So so it's a good question. They would, from the standpoint of intellectual responsibility, then they would need to and would naturally be inclined to know the explanations of their predecessors in order to be able to learn through the sugya. The problem is that not all of them had access to everyone else's work. So I don't think there's any evidence that Rambam knew of Rashi, right? Like that Rambam had access to any of this stuff, Whereas let's say Ibn Ezra, who was, traveled all over, ultimately ended up with the Bali Tosfos and was able to learn from them, but there was not always cross-pollination that went in both directions, So the Rambam didn't know about Rashi, but he did learn the Gaonim and the people, the Chachamim who came before him, who were part of his
where did this? I know this is really far back history now at this point to ask, but where did these splits come from? Were they always inherently these were all valid ways, or did they come from there being slowly these different Mishnah versions, like a head canon of halacha?
Right. So that's what we touched on 2 weeks ago when the Rambam says that if you see a machlokas, then you know that if you see machlokas about anything, then that thing was not from Sinai, and that was what we said is difficult topics. So that aside, I mean, in halacha, you are always going to have questions, right? Because there's always going to be new cases, and there's always going to be especially once Torah Pesach started being written and there are set formulations of something like in text, there's always going to be questions about how to interpret it. And there's always going to be machlokas on that. And what we say is that with Chachmei Yisrael, then there's always going to be what we in the yeshiva call svara, right? There's always going to be like a conceptual evidence-based argument for why you're interpreting it this way or that way. And that's almost inevitable. And in fact, in this week's Parsha is the first machlokas. Right, this week's parsha is Shmini, and you have when Nadav and Avihu die, and this is in the middle of the Miluim. So then it says, so Moshe says, hold on just a second here. This is in Vayikra 10:16. So this is in the middle of the dedication to Mikdash, right, or the Mishkan. So it says, "Ve'is sir chadas dorosh darash Moshe." So Moshe inquired persistently about the goat offering of the chatas. V'hine soraf, and it was burned. So in other words, it was supposed to be partially eaten, not burned entirely. So Vayiktsov al Elazar al Isamar b'nei Aaron hanosrim limor. So he got mad at Elazar and Itamar, the sons of Aaron, the remaining sons of Aaron, saying, "Why did you not eat the chatas in the place of the holiness? He kodesh kadashimhi, it's holy of holies. And that was given to you to bear the iniquity of the congregation, to atone for you before Hashem. You did not, I gotta read this part here. Behold, its blood was not brought into the sanctuary within. You should eat it, bakodesh, you should have eaten it in a state of holiness. In the holy, kasher tzivesi, as I commanded. So that's Moshe rebuking them essentially for not following halacha. Then Vaydiber Aaron el Moshe, but then Aaron said to Moshe, Hin hayom hikrivu es chatasam es olasam lifnei Hashem, v'tikrei osei ke'ele. Was it they who this day offered their sin offering and their elevation offering before Hashem? Now that such things befell me, if I ate a chatas today, would it be good in the eyes of Hashem? Vayishma Moshe vayitav beinav. And Moshe heard, and it was good in his eyes.
This is after his other two sons.
After his other two sons died. So the machlokas there was Moshe, and you see, by the way, this is Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So this is Moshe knew the halacha. Plain pshat, he knew the halacha, but this is a machlokas on how to apply the halacha.
The machlokas is really on the case. It's like, is this the case? Like Moshe, you're right that would be the situation if that was the case, but this is really a different case in reality in a lot of ways.
So I don't.
My foreman, I'm watching a video. It's really pretty, really beautiful idea.
Yeah,
he kind of explains that like today of all days, like when I'm having to literally recognize that the ultimate essence is that I own nothing, including the rights to my own kids. That like I'm kind of summarizing here, but like it would be almost a contradiction for me to still partake of this offering when nothing is mine.
So obviously I didn't hear the Rabbi Foreman share. Yeah. That sounds like taking a more philosophical approach, like based on the meaning of the two sons. It did have that. And the reason I'm bringing this in now is that this was a halachic machlokas about how to interpret the law, even if it has philosophical ramifications. And I'm saying, so answering your original question about like how machlokas comes about, this was a machlokas between two chachamim, and one of them was the one who got the Torah, but like machlokas is going to be unavoidable in that sense. Yeah.
It's sort of a weird question. What does it matter? Like, what's the status of slaying from Moshe? Because it just, I'll explain a counter scenario. Imagine Aaron thought like Moshe.
Yeah. And
then like if Lair Sanhedrin were to decide, okay, the halacha is wrong, it's actually like what Aaron originally said, I assume they'd be right.
I mean, that seems to be a matter of legal authority, right? Like not a matter of right or wrong, a matter of what do we follow.
And my question is, based on this, do we have to care about how Moshe interpreted the Torah?
What do you mean by care about? Because when it comes to halacha, then we go by whatever the halachic system is. And let's say, for example, Moshe, every Navi, you can't paskin based on Nevuah, but a Navi could be in the Sanhedrin and act in the capacity of Chacham. So let's say Moshe was in the Sanhedrin, right? And there was a case that came up and he argued one way and everyone else argued the other way. We would paskin against Moshe. But that's Moshe as Chacham, not Moshe as giver of the Torah.
I guess I just try to think as Chacham. But say like, whatever we have the Pesach Moshe's ways in this case, and then as years down the line, they think Aaron's way makes more sense.
Right. So that would have to do with whatever the rules of Pesach are for how you can paskin. And I'm not familiar enough about those in issues like this. Yeah. So there's always going to be machlokas there. And then there's also, again, putting that problematic realm on the side of things are forgotten or things are lost in terms of understanding. Like the Rambam himself said that with Gaonim, people stopped being able to understand the Gaonim, and the Gaonim were trying to understand the Talmud. And then in that difference of understanding, there's going to be machlokas there also. And so going back to your original question about, well, what happens between the Rambam and now? So machlokas just multiplies because people are not as great at chachamim. There are more shitos. And now instead of just figuring out, well, what did the Gemara mean? We have to figure out, well, what did the Rambam mean and Rashi? And there's a machlokas about how to learn the Rambam, and just proliferates. And then there's more chumras. And then it gets very, very, it's unfortunate. And that's why the Rambam tried to stop it. Because intellectually there's not a problem to have a lot of opinions, but practically, if everyone's doing different things, you have disunity and you have confusion.
And why didn't everybody just go with whatever the Rambam says, since he at least made it?
So there were, the two major objections to the Rambam were that the Rambam did break from tradition in that he didn't record any opposing opinions. Whereas the tradition.
The whole point. It was the whole point.
Right. That was, yeah. So Rambam says, someone tried to catch him on that, and I was like, dude, that's not what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
But people didn't like the fact that he did that because it seizes too much authority.
It's like he's putting like an unending reign on his.
Right. And that's why the Ravid in his critiques of the Rambam was so vocally harsh, that like, that they, if someone's over here, you shoot a fireball in the Rambam's face, or like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've seen, because he was trying to break the Rambam's authority in the eyes of people. And then the second reason that they didn't like the Mishneh Torah is that the Rambam didn't cite his sources, which the Rambam himself regretted. Because he says later on in his life, when he wanted to like figure out why he posed in a certain way,
he forgot himself.
Yeah, he forgot. Now you cut him some slack. Like, you write that book on all the laws and all of the Torah, But
it's gonna be a little harder.
Yeah, so he says he doesn't wish that. He doesn't regret the structure of the Mishneh Torah. He likes the decision to not have sources in the Mishneh Torah, because then it would be like a billion times as long. But he wanted to write a separate pamphlet with all the sources, which is what, curiously enough, the author of the Shulchan Aruch did. Is Rav Yosef Karo wrote the Kesef Mishnah, and one of the functions of the Kesef Mishnah is to try to trace all the sources of the Rambam.
Oh, so why don't we just go ahead? Let's just put those two together.
Yeah, because it's not so clear where the Rambam got everything from. There's dispute about that also.
Oh, so it's not necessarily for sure that it's all right.
Right, exactly. Yeah, like
called Kesef Torah.
Kesef Mishnah, Mishneh probably. Yeah, Mishnah, I think. Yeah, and then there's the Lechem Mishnah. There's other stuff. Yeah, were you gonna say something?
Actually, I forgot.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
I think we started about.
Yeah,
we need to have a class for this stuff.
Well, that's so. What I did, this today, what we're doing is like a short version of what we spent like a couple of weeks on at the beginning of last year. So I did this last year. You're right. People should do this. That's why I say you should do this. And people need to do this like at least once a year, because it's basic stuff.
Basic literacy.
Yeah. In fact, what I did when I taught my intro to Gemara class is I made a list of 20 terms with one sentence definitions of Torah, mitzvah, Torah Sheba'al Peh, Mishnah, and I drilled it into all of my kids so that they had definitions. So that's
I like that.
Yeah,
you should do a separate course on it, and I would go to that. Really.
Yeah,
especially when I go back to Missouri. I would love if you did that.
It's something every Jew should know. Yeah, I mean, that's why I gave a shiur also a couple. The last couple of weeks, I'm doing a series with the women on Fridays of D'Rabbanan and D'Oraisa, and we're going over what a D'Rabbanan is. Right. Which is what again, a lot of people just don't even know what a D'Rabbanan is. Yeah, they just have an intuition about it. Okay, yeah.
How many times have there been attempts to make catch-all compilations of Torah? Because there's been the Mishnah. Let's see, there's Mishnah.
But see, that's exactly the Rambam's point. Mishnah was never intended to be a catch-all compilation of Torah. Only the Mishneh Torah was intended to be that. No one ever attempted to write all of Torah. They were only writing the stuff. So the Mishnah was only writing the stuff that needed to be preserved for teaching Torah, and the Talmud Bavli was only writing the stuff that was in danger of being forgotten. Yeah.
Refers to like, where's the catch-all isn't like simple. When I say catch-all, I mean like they're simple, not. If I ask me my initial statement was wrong, but I'll do a new statement. Like, how many times have people tried to make simple summaries? Because the Mishnah,
right. Yeah, not very much. I mean, I guess the Shulchan Aruch is in a sense trying to make a simple summary, but it still is including multiple opinions. You could say the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, but again, that's not called Torah Kula. That's just like the stuff we keep. You know who the closest one who did what the Mishneh Torah was the Aruch HaShulchan, but because he also wrote on mitzvos that we don't keep nowadays. But the thing is he brought in all the shitos. So it's much longer. So it's more useful in the sense that it's all the shitos and how they're derived from everything, but it's not simplified. It's the opposite.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And you said the Talmud Bavli was written so that it wouldn't be forgotten. So the way, it's written, were they all walking around talking to each other like that? Like, Rebbe Yehuda said.
Right. So it's a good question why it was written that way. So it was I can't speak to the specific style about why they chose to, like, Rambam is written as a law book. Talmud Bavli is written as a recording of discussions, right?
So, okay, that's what I'm confused about.
Yeah.
Is it that the recording, were the discussions themselves part of what they had memorized, or was it just that when they started recording down what they knew, they also included the discussions they were having while writing it?
I mean, it was both, as far as I understand, meaning that because these issues had been discussed and debated before, and because they knew that there were chachamim who analyzed these things, and because we wanted to always preserve the minority opinions, right? Because the situations, you don't want to get to a situation where, let's say you and I have a machlokas, right? And let's say we end up posting like you. So if we only recorded your opinion, then if Yosef comes along 200 years later and thinks of my opinion and thinks, oh, he's the first one who is thinking of it, And, we want to have this record of, no, this was a minority opinion and this is why we rejected it.
It's already been refuted.
Yeah. So I think that's why they wanted to memorize and record all of the discussions. I think I mentioned this to you before.
Okay.
But the letter of Rav Shrira Gaon, who was one of the last Gaonim, he was the father of Hai Gaon was the last one, right? Oh, see, I thought you like
okay,
knew all the Gaonim like baseball cards, like no. But Rav Shrira Gaon wrote a letter about how Torah Shabbat Peh was passed down and why different things were written that way. We have a copy in Yeshiva, but Oren might still be borrowing it. That would answer a lot of your questions about why things were written down in that way.
And then the contemporary rabbis that were writing, those were while they were still living. When you have their discussions, they're having them in the moment as they're writing them, or because they're not remembering those because they're literally
right. So then at this point, not at this point, sorry, things went from oral to written in the most dramatic fashion with a transition to the Talmud Bavli and after the Talmud Bavli. So then by that time, then there were no longer efforts made to preserve oral discussions of these things. Maybe a couple hundred years after, I don't know what of the Savaraim and like Masechta Katanas were still, in note. I don't really know how that was passed down, but then things transitioned to writing. Now we no longer need to preserve discussions that went on. It's going to be like, you're going to open up like a Ritva on Shas and he'll say he'll quote other Chachamim who came before him. Sometimes he'll say an oral thing, like my Rebbe said this, but it's primarily focused on the written thing now. Yeah, which makes it easier and harder. Right? What was that? Those are Mefarshim, right? It makes it easier in the sense that everything is committed to writing. But that again, anytime you write something down and if you're passing it down based on the oral person, right? The oral Torah. Let's say this is in Torah Shabbat Peh times, and I say something and you don't know what I mean. You can ask me, and I can explain to you, and we can check. Right. I can check that you understand. So there are not as great chances of it deviating. But once it gets put in verbal form, even not in writing, just verbal recorded form that's like passed down, then there's a question, well, what did he mean? And then once it's put in writing, you also subject it to like bad girsas of and then it leads to more machlokas. Okay. Yeah.
I could probably ask more questions on it, but I'll save it for when you have a class on it.
Yeah. Okay. So this is why why do we do this? We did this because the Rambam is saying that the Mishneh Torah was never written to be read alone. We just read him say, you read the Torah Shebechsav, and then you read this, and then you know all of Torah Shabbat Peh. So up until now in Rambam Bekius, most of the sugyas we've done have only quoted a pasuk here or a pasuk there, but we haven't done any area of halacha where the majority of halachos are referenced in Torah Shebechsav, and now that's what we're going to be doing because we're doing Korban Pesach, and a lot of the halachos are rooted there. Okay, so we should read through the Torah Shebechsav first, and get the Torah Shabbat Peh. So let's start that. So this is in the packet on the Torah Shebechsav thing, Pesukim Torah Shebechsav. And what this is compiled by the editor. He just quoted the Pesukim and then had in nice little explanatory notes, little brackets that explain things. Okay, so if I were really thorough, we would do this actually inside, but we're just going to content ourselves with these Pesukim right now. Okay. So this is in Shemos Yud Beis in Parshas Bo. V'yomer Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. So when is this discussion taking place? This is taking place he says, HaChodesh Hazeh, Chodesh Nisan Lachem is for you Rosh Chodeshim, the first of months. So this is before Malchus Bechoros, okay, after Choshech. Okay, so this is gearing up towards the last plague, and the Jews are still in Mitzrayim, and God is giving them the first mitzvah. This is famously the first mitzvah that's given to Klal Yisrael, which is setting up the calendar. Okay, so this month should be for you the first of months. Rishon hu l'chem l'chodshei hashana, the first month for you of the months of the year. Dabru, so that's actually not going to be related to us. That's Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh. Okay, Dabru el kol adas Yisrael lemor. Say to the children of Israel, speak to the children of Israel lemor, saying, V'yasor l'chodesh hazeh, on the 10th of this month. And by the way, back up for 1 second. What is going to be weird? Not weird. That's such a vague term.
I hate the word weird.
Yeah. There's going to be something that's difficult for us about navigating the Pesukim of Korban Pesach.
Because you have to distinguish what was just halacha one time,
right,
versus what's halacha eternally.
Right. Okay. So there's two Korban Pesachs. There's called Pesach Mitzrayim, which is the one they did that night in Mitzrayim, and then there's Pesach Doros, Pesach for all generations, and there are differences. So the Pesukim, Moshe here is talking to the people about what to do in Mitzrayim. Some of those halachos were only for that night and never again happened, and some of them became laws for all time. So that's what. So you're going to see, for example, this first halacha, be'asor l'chodesh on the 10th of this month. That was only halacha for the Jews in Mitzrayim. Okay, that we don't hold that you start getting the animal on the 10th of Nisan. Okay, so he says each man should take for himself a seh. Okay, now a seh is a sheep or a goat. Okay, so a sheep or a goat, we don't have a word in English that has both of them, I don't think. Right? I think we have different words for each of the animals. I don't think there's one word that includes both of them. But in Hebrew, there is.
I mean, unless you mean like categorically, like livestock.
Right, then that's too broad because that would also include cows, right? So we're going to have to just say a seh for a household, for beis avos, for a, how do you translate beis avos? A paternal household?
A clan?
A clan, yeah. Yeah, that has different connotations nowadays. But yeah, celibais, a goat or a sheep for a household. Okay, footnote says, or the bracket says, Al kol beis av l'hishtatif b'seh l'korban pesach. Each familial clan has to join together for a seh for a Korban Pesach. Yeah.
So we're talking about beis av. We're talking about like the halachic avs is in the subgroups within the mishpatim. I mean the shvatim.
So I actually don't remember what we mean here. So this might be something we have to look at for the halachos. V'im yimad, and obviously, okay, and this is going to be a good illustration why we can't rely on Torah B'Ksav exclusively, because like that question Yosef just asked, what do we mean by beis av? Like, how do you know beis av? You know,
Okay.
well, how do
you mean Chumash?
in the Chumash, right? Exactly. Yeah. So this is why we're going to need the Mishneh Torah. But since the Mishneh Torah is explaining this, we need to see this first. V'im yimad habayis mios miseh. If the house is too few to have a seh, okay, if the bracket says v'im ein dai anashim b'mishpacha lechol seh echad. If there are not enough people in each family to eat one seh, okay, because we're going to see later on in the halachos, all of the seh needs to be consumed. So you make the group based on how.
Yeah, like what if you're one person?
Yeah, right. So that's why you would need to join into a group, right? So, actually, this is what it's going to say. V'lakachu u'shcheno hakarov el beiso. Then he and his neighbor who's closest to his house should take b'michtas nefashos, a number of souls. L'fi minyan ha'anashim b'chavurah. In other words, join up with another group. Each l'fi achlo, each person according to his eating. Tachosu al haseh should be counted for an animal. Shehei mispar hanimnim al haseh b'yachas lagodlo. That the number of people who are appointed for a seh should correspond to its size. Seh samim, a blomum, a blemish-free seh. Zachar, male, ben shana, 1 year old, yihi lechem. It should be for you. Min hakavasim umin ha'izim tikachu. So this is why I was saying it means a sheep or a goat. So it clarifies what does that mean. It says min hakavasim from the sheep, umin, which means omin, or from ha'izim, the goats tikachu you should take.
Is there anything else that is also considered the Is this a product claw or?
I don't know what you call this because it says seh and then the Torah B'Chsav itself defines it. So I don't even know if this is a product law or if this is just like the Torah B'Chsav explaining itself. You know? You mean because do we apply this definition to other cases?
What's the distinction between the product claw and Torah B'Chsav explaining itself?
I don't know. I feel like in cases of product claw, sometimes it's not as intuitive as this, right? Like it seems, but I hear the question because both of them are expanding on a category.
I just think it's just, the way I think of it is just people of the Torah knew how their language works.
Right.
We don't, so we have to create these weird counterintuitive categories because we just don't know the language all
that is definitely true. Yeah.
So this is explaining what that the Chumash doesn't explain?
This is the Chumash.
Oh, what is this explaining or what is this saying that we need the Mishneh Torah for?
So you would not know, there are so many halachos that you wouldn't know from this that the Torah B'Al Peh explains. So for example, what is blemish?
Okay.
Right? Or who it counts as an ish, in terms of like an ish, like ish lefi achlo tachazu al. So for example, do you count, I don't know, do you count slaves? Do you count like, people who are like, who's considered part of the household in regards to these numbers? How do you assess how much they eat? Why does it say hu ushcheno hakarov abeso? Like, does it actually have to be a neighbor who's closest to your house? Right. So like all these are questions that the Torah Peh doesn't, the Torah Peh explains. And this is why, for example, with the groups in Judaism who denied an authoritative Torah Peh, like the Tzedukim or the Karaites, so they might have different explanations for these things that are not given to Moshe at Sinai. You could come up with your own explanations for these things, but that's not necessarily going to reflect God's will.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the Mishnah Mishnah also has
the Mishnah wrote down whatever was in danger of being forgotten.
No, I'm saying in this case, were these halachos being the Mishnah?
So that's what I'm saying, is that just like we saw that with tzitzis, there's only one Mishnah about it because the rest of them were already known. But let's say other halachos, let's say like in malachos of Shabbos, let's say there's many Mishnahs about different malachos. Not all of them, then depends on what was well known at the time and what was in danger of being forgotten. So in Masechus Pesachim, you have several prakim which are about these halachos, about the halachos of the Korban Pesach. So and the Mishnayos there tell stuff, but they don't say everything. Some of those things weren't written down until the time of the Gemara, because they were known at the time of the Mishnah, or could just be alluded to.
The Mishnah doesn't have the entire comprehensive list of halachos.
Correct. The Mishnah was not intended to be comprehensive.
No, I know that in general, but I'm
right.
just asking factually if it's yes or no on this one, at least particularly.
I don't know. I don't know the Mishnah well enough to know which ones.
Oh, okay. So we don't know if this is one of those where we necessarily have to use the Mishneh Torah.
Well, you're going to have to use the Mishneh Torah because definitely by the time of the Rishonim, then these things were not known. Okay. Right. Just here's another analogy, which I forgot to mention before. A good analogy for the Mishnah versus the Mishneh Torah is the Mishnah would be like a professor who has lectured on a topic many times and wrote his own lecture notes and then compiled his lecture notes for another professor to use to teach the course. Okay, so first of all, not everything is going to be written down. It's going to be only the stuff that he needs to jog his memory. And it's a compilation for the purpose of someone else teaching it. Mishneh Torah is like an encyclopedia. The goal of encyclopedia is to record everything on the topic in a conceptual order. Yeah. Okay. So then it says, and it shall be for you as a safeguard. Shimru oso mipnei nezek, guard it from harm or from blemish. Ad arba asar yom l'chodesh hazeh, until the 14th of this month. V'shachatu oso kol kahal adas Yisrael bin arba'im, and the entire community of the congregation of Israel shall shecht it in the afternoon. V'lakachu min hadam v'nasnu al shtei hamezuzos. Now here's an example of a halacha that's definitely only in Mitzrayim. They shall take from the blood and place it on the doorposts. That's tzadei haPesach, the sides of the doorway. V'al hamashkov, and on the lintel. Al habatim, on the houses asher yochlu oso behem, on the houses that they eat it in. The achlu as a basar balayla hazeh, and they shall eat the meat on this night. Sli eish umatzos al mrorim yochluhu, roasted over the fire, and matzos on, meaning with bitter herbs, yochluhu, they shall eat it. Al tochlu mimenu na, you shall not eat from it partially cooked, uvashel muvushal b'mayim, or cooked in water, but only roasted over the fire, its head over its flanks, over its innards, meaning bishlei musa, meaning intact, meaning the entire animal. Veloso siru, which means lo al tashiru mimeno ad boker, don't leave anything over until morning. V'hanosar mimeno ad boker be'esh tisrofu, and the leftovers that are left over until morning, you should burn it in the fire. Yeah.
I wish we did this still. It sounds so much more.
Yeah, well, talk to Ariel Rahman. He'll hook you up, right?
Why?
Because Ariel is a Talmud of Rav Chaim Lozer Chait, who is very into Har HaBayis stuff. And this is the only korban that you don't need mikdash for to bring. You just need to bring it on Har HaBayis. And I think every year there are groups of Jews who try to find ways to do the Korban Pesach on Har HaBayis.
And then the Israeli government shut.
That part's cool, but I actually really like the neighbor part about having to make sure that it forces you to
be neighborly.
Yeah, it's so awesome.
Yeah. Let's just do one more paragraph and then stop for today and then continue tomorrow. Moshe. So this is now in Shmos Chaf Gimel Yud Ches, which is in Parshas Mishpatim. Moshe Aaron Zos Kukachas HaPasach. Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe and Aaron, this is the statute of the Pesach. Kol ben Nechar, anyone who is literally son of a foreigner. Okay, but we'll have to see what that means. Lo yochal bo, shall not eat from it. We'll see. It doesn't mean a non-Jew; it means a Jew. V'chol evet ish miknas kasef, and any servant of a man who was purchased with money, with silver, umalta also, you should circumcise him. Oz yochal bo, and then he can eat it. Toshav, which is a ger toshav, we talked about that 2 weeks ago. The sachir, and a hired worker, which the bracket says nachri ha'oved etel Yehudi tmuras sachar. That's a non-Jew who works with a Jew in exchange for payment. Lo yochal bo, may not eat it. Bavais echad yechel, it must be eaten in one house. Lo totzi min basar chutza. The meat from it shall not be brought outside from the house. Brackets asur lahoti es basar michutz l'makom hachavurah. It's also to bring the meat outside of the group. The etzem lo sishbur bone. Do not break any bone in it. Kol adas Yisrael yaso. So the entire assembly of Israel shall do it. V'chi agur itcha ger. And when a ger will be with you, will dwell with you, of Asaf Pesach Hashem, and will make a Pesach offering to Hashem. Himo lo kol zachar, every male of his shall be circumcised. V'az yikrav laso, so then he may come close to bring it, to do it. V'hayak ezrach haaretz, and he will be like the native in the land. I think that's the riboy I was telling you about, Chizkiyahu, that it extends this from Pesach to all the other mitzvos.
Okay.
Hold on, we'll just finish reading this. Yeah. And any uncircumcised person may not eat from it. Torah achas la ezrach v'lager hagar b'selchachem. There should be one law for the native and for the ger who dwells among you. Vayasu kol b'nei Yisrael kasher tiva Hashem es Moshe es Aaron kinesu. And all of b'nei Yisrael shall do it. Kasher tiva Hashem es Moshe, as Hashem commanded Moshe, and Aaron kinesu. That's what they did. And I think let me just confirm what I told you just now. I think Rashi brings it down. This is 23:18. 23:18.
Also, I have no clue where that's from.
Yeah, it's funny. They don't say where the full pasuk is.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a problem. Okay, fine. All right, so I'll have to look at it earlier. Yeah, what are you asking?
So this is the description about Pesach that was given the very first time in Mitzrayim.
Yeah.
And then from here we have to figure out which ones are only for that one night and which ones remain and forever.
So that's actually part of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So Torah Sheba'al Peh will tell us which ones were.
But I'm saying that's what
Torah Sheba'al Peh is going to be explaining. Yeah,
and from this,
right, and giving all the detailed halachos for everything else as well, right?
Okay.
Like when it says you should not eat from it partially cooked, like how partially is partially. Yeah.
Okay, so if we want to mention the Toshav thing,
yeah,
probably isn't. They probably weren't. Were they told that even that night?
So
because they didn't have any ger Toshav.
Right. So I noticed that
did they in that
well, there were technically speaking there were no Jews at that point, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But at least familial. At least they have the familial thing,
right?
I would imagine that they would have, if they had somehow, whatever. I guess it's not even Toshav because they're not even in Israel yet, so it would be.
Yeah, so that's what we were trying to look at.
Can you call it a Toshav if you're not in Israel? If you're sort of like
well, you could refer to the institution of Toshav if you're not in Israel, but meaning because presumably they got these halachos, so it is kind of weird that the sidebar makes it sound like all of these were given to them in Mitzrayim. Yeah. For the first part, but it's unclear because there's really two parshos it's quoting, and then 23. Which we can't find right now. This is, I think, was given to them as part of a list of mitzvos, like going forward, like, for when they get into Israel. I got to find where it is.
So they were aware that they would eventually probably have Gerim at this point.
Yeah.
Weren't there already Gerim?
I mean, I don't know. So I'm trying
to. The year of Rav.
Right.
But that was after Pesach.
Yeah, and they became Jewish at Sinai.
I thought you were talking about but later on. Later on, like in Mishpatim, as in they already joined. They joined the day after Pesach Mitzrayim.
Even that, yeah, it was still after, right?
But I was saying they joined before whatever was going on in Mishpatim. So, right,
but they joined after at least what happened Pesach night. So when they were told this is before they had Teshavim.
Right. Yeah, that seems to be clear. Yeah, so the Rashi, so this was in 1249. Was that reference in the packet? 1249. Yeah, it was. No, sorry. This must be a different reference. No, there must be two places.
Something I see. No, I see like over here.
Yeah, it's in Bamidbar, right? So that's that. But you were trying to find this one, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so it looks like it's in Bamidbar, 1516 maybe. Either way, Rashi in Shemos 12 does say, for Va'asa Pesach, that Pesach, you shall do a Pesach. Yachoma Hamiskar Yasa Pesach Miya, no. Torah Achas, Lahashvos Ger La'ezrach, Af L'shar Mitzvos Shabbat Torah. Right, so when it says Torah Achas V'ger Mishpat Echad, that is equating a ger to a native for all the other mitzvos. So, like in other words, the pasuk explicitly tells you the ger does a Korban Pesach like the other Jews, and then the statement one Torah for all of you includes the ger and all the other mitzvos. Yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah, when I was putting out, I don't know if you saw this because this was in the another chat. I put out a request to see who's going to come for Wednesday night shiur, and I put out topic requests. So there's a Giora who I know who asked if we just say yeah. So she asked, could we do? It'd be interesting to look into the
Giora.
Yeah.
How old is she?
She's married with kids and I think lives in France, maybe.
How dare she?
Anyway, so she said that she wanted to know what ideas we learn about Gerin from Korban Pesach, which I've never gone into before. Oh, cool. That'd be interesting. Yeah.
Actually, probably a thing about Korban Pesach, and that both of them are based around like an initial meal or event.
Yeah.
And then also have a special thing including for gers.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. That's interesting. Yeah. All right, let's stop here for today. So plan for tomorrow is continue the Torah book or finish up the Torah book, then go through the Sefer mitzvos and all these mitzvos, and then choose what to focus on. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll stop this.
Yeah.